Good morning and welcome to Teal House Farm. Today I'm going to show you how to can ground meat so that you can have a shelf-stable meat supply at your own home. So why would you want to can meat? That's a question I've gotten before and a question I've asked myself. There's two real big reasons to can meat. One, if you are getting your meat, especially from a butcher, like buying a whole hog, a lot of times you'll get too many rolls of the ground meat to be able to store in your freezer, and canning meat is a way to be able to keep it for a long time if you can't fit it in your freezer. The other reason is that it's an easy shelf-stable food. So if I'm in a hurry, I can pull out a can of ground sausage, throw some butter, flour, and milk in there to make sausage gravy and toss it on some toast for a real easy meal. And also in times where there might be food insecurity about where food is coming from or how much is available, you know that you have a healthy, homemade alternative that'll last on the shelf for quite a long time. Canning meat at home sounds scary. It's actually very simple. Here's everything that you need to do it. You need a pressure canner. You cannot water bath canned meat. You will make yourself very sick. This is a 22 quart T-fal pressure canner. It's a lower end, a lot less expensive. I'll put a link for it below if you're interested in looking at it. Pressure canners range pretty widely in price, so you don't need to buy the most expensive one to do a good job for you. You also obviously need your meat, and you need a pan to brown it in. Today we're going to can up 5 pounds of ground sausage. You're going to need your glass mason jars. It has to be a mason jar. You cannot can in, say, a reused jelly jar from the store. It'll explode on you in the canner. And you're going to need your lids, wide mouth or regular, depending on what jars you're using. Today I'm using pints, and I'm using a variety of wide mouth and regular mouth jars just because that's what I have on hand. And you'll need your rings to put on the jars and on the lids to keep them on. You'll need jar lifters. You can do it without jar lifters. You have to be very careful. You're going to burn your fingers. And then the last thing I really recommend having on hand is a book, a trusted source for canning information. This is the Kerr canning book. Ball also makes one. You can also check out the National Center for Home Food Preservation website, which I'll also link below, which tells you how to can anything you can think of safely. I will say that the National Center for Food Preservation is very, very conservative. They consider it unsafe unless there is lots of scientific tests to prove it is safe. So there are things that you can that are not listed there. One question that I've been asked before is whether you can pressure can in a pressure cooker like an Instapot. And the answer is no. You can pressure cook in a pressure canner. I could cook a turkey in here if I wanted to. You do not want to pressure can in a pressure cooker for two reasons. One, they're not made for that purpose. And two, pressure cookers tend to be very small. Like your Instapot, I could probably only fit 2 jars in there. It's a waste of resources and time to only can 2 jars at a time. The last thing I'm going to say before we get started is you want to make sure you set aside dedicated time to do this. It will take about 2 hours from start to finish, and a pressure canner is not something that you can just set and walk away and come back in an hour and a half. You have to keep checking on it. So make sure you set aside time to do it. It's well worth the time it takes. We're only going to do about 6 jars today. I think I can fit 18 pint jars in here because you can stack them on top of each other, which is quite a lot. So you can do that much at one time, so it's well worth your time. But make sure you set aside enough time to do it and do it correctly. Pressure canning is not something you want to skimp your time on. You could make somebody very sick or set up for a dangerous situation where things are not cool enough. First thing, we need to wash and sanitize the jars. Wash them in hot soapy water. And then I do not have a dishwasher, so we're going to sanitize them in the oven. If you have a dishwasher, just load your dishwasher up with your jars, run a cycle that washes and sanitizes them. Since I don't have one, I'm going to put the jars on a cookie sheet, and I'm going to put them in the oven at 220 degrees for about 25 minutes, and that'll get them nice and toasty and sanitized. It's okay if they're in there a little bit longer while we're doing everything else, as long as they stay warm for when we load them up. Alright, now we're going to brown the meat. Forgive my cabinets, we're working on a project. That's not how they usually look. I'm gonna do 5 pounds like I said. We're gonna put it in a pan. Any pan will work. I have my big cast iron skillet. We're gonna empty all the meat in there and cook it till it's nice and brown. While our meat is browning, we're gonna get the other things ready. So I always heat my lids up in a pot of water before I can. I have read that they've recently changed the canning rules and you don't have to do that anymore with pressure canning, but old habits die hard. So I'm gonna go ahead and put my clean new lids, you wanna use new lids, just in a pot of water, and I'm gonna sit them on the stove in a little bit and let them simmer before I can. The other thing I'm going to get ready is our canner. I forgot to mention, if you have a glass top, one of those flat glass top stoves, you need to read very carefully what kind of canners that you can use. Most canners like this one are concave on the bottom, the slight indentation, and what can happen on a glass top stove is it can create suction and it'll explode the top of your stove. Also, if the canner is large, it gets really heavy with all those jars in there. That can also crack the top of your stove. So if you have a glass top stove, you need to read carefully about any canners that you might be able to use, or you need to invest in an outside, like propane camper type burner to do your canning on. Right now we're gonna add our water. I have hot water from the stove. It just gives us a head start if it's already hot. And we're gonna add it to the canner. You need enough water in here that you can create steam for the whole canning time. So I usually fill it up until the water reaches my bottom joint on my finger. And that's when I know I have enough. I meant middle knuckle, not bottom knuckle. This is plenty of water for what we're going to do. Okay, we're about ready. It's browned. It does not have to be perfect. Remember, it's going to cook too when it's in the canner. You just need it, all the pieces browned. Now we're going to strain off the grease and put it in our jars. Our meat's hot and ready, our jars are hot and ready. We're gonna double check the canner. What we do is we hold it up to a light and we're gonna look from the back side through, make sure we can still see through, so we know our canner has the right venting and isn't going to explode on us. Okay, looks good. All right, and we're gonna put it on the stove, and we don't want the water to boil, but we want it hot, so when we put our warm jars in there, they don't explode because they're touching cold water. Now we're ready to load them up with meat. You want to leave at least 1 inch of head space, that's empty space, before you get to the lid. Otherwise you won't get a good seal. It helps if you have a wide mouth funnel. I actually don't have one anymore. My kids took it outside to play with at some point and it never came back to the house. So we're just gonna use a ladle, and we're gonna make sure we clean off the top rim of the jars well before we put a lid on them, so that our mess doesn't keep it from sealing. We've tightened them to what they call fingertip tighten, which means not as tight as you can go because you'll never get them off when you're done, but tight enough that the lids aren't going to pop off. This is called dry packing, and I'll be honest, if you go on the National Center for Food Preservation website or the USDA website, They recommend packing meat in broth or in water. That's what their scientific studies have studied. They'll tell you there is not enough studies on the dry packing to say whether it is safe or not. This is how a lot of people used to can meat, how a lot of homesteaders still do it, how I do it, but I'm just letting you know that you need to make the decision for yourself, what you feel safe doing, and if you visit one of those websites, they're going to recommend that after the step of loading it with the meat, you then add boiling water or boiling meat broth before putting your lid on. Lid's on, valve is open. We need to build up steam first. We're gonna turn the oven on high, or the stove on high, and once we start seeing steam, we'll let it go for 10 minutes and then we're gonna close it down. How much meat to each jar? Well, we browned 5 pounds of meat and it filled 6 pint jars with a little bit left over that I'm gonna use to make an egg casserole for breakfast tomorrow. I would say it's about 3/4 of a pound of sausage to 1 pint jar, if you need a way to guess, you know, how many jars to prepare. Okay, we've locked it down. This will stop, this canner has a safety valve that'll stop when the steam's built up enough, and then the pressure will start going up. And we want to, for where we live, we want 11 pounds pressure for 75 minutes. You need to look online at one of those websites I've listed below and figure out for your altitude what you need for pressure canning safely, because it's different. The pounds of pressure is different depending on how far above sea level you are. For here, we want 11 pounds. We can go over 11 a little bit. We never want to drop under. If we drop under, we have to start our clock again. So keep it over 11 pounds. 75 minutes, and then we can turn the heat off and let it cool down. Time is up. We're gonna turn the heat off. We are not gonna touch the canner. Just turn the heat off and let it cool all the way down. You want your dial to go all the way back to 0 before you even think about opening the canner. Otherwise it will explode on you. That is a lot of pressure inside. Okay, we are very close to 0, so we're gonna go ahead and release the valve. Ouch, that's hot. Release the valve the rest of the way to let the remaining steam out. And when we hit 0, we can open the lid. That's it, pretty much. We're gonna let them cool off on this towel. After about a day, we're gonna take the rings off the jars. You wanna store home canned goods without the rings on the jar. That way, if you have a bad seal, the lid will pop off and you'll know not to eat that jar. If you keep the rings on, it artificially presses the lids on, and you wouldn't know if there was a problem. Make sure you label and date so you know when you canned it. And then when you're ready to eat it, all you do is pop open a jar, warm it up, and you're good to go. You may also hear loud popping sounds when they're cooling out. Just had one if the camera got that. That's the seals suctioning up from the vacuum. Totally normal, it's a good sound. Home canned meat is recommended that you eat it within a year for best quality. It's safe for 2 years is what the general recommendation is. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions we didn't answer, please just leave them below and I will do my best. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe. We'll catch you next time.